Welcome to Industry Insights with Route Consultant, your front row seat to the fast-moving world of logistics and beyond. Each week, we bring you game-changing insights, real-world strategies, and fresh perspectives to fuel smarter investments and build stronger businesses. Join us as we sit down with expert guests to explore emerging trends and pressing topics across a wide range of industries. This is Industry Insights. Welcome to Industry Insights. I am your host, Josh Gregory, and today we're diving into the electric vehicle industry. And honestly, every single major corporation right now, from FedEx to Amazon to UPS, they have all made major commitments to the electric vehicle industry, to renewable energy in general. So whether you're a contractor that has been in this space, has owned fleets for years, or you're trying to look and decide if you want to enter the logistics industry, electric needs to be something that you are thinking about, that you understand the costs, the benefits, the challenges, if you really want to position yourself for success in the future. And today, my guest is John Harris, the CEO of Harbinger. And this is a company that's taking a little bit of a different tack, a little bit of a different look at the electric vehicle industry. Instead of trying to just cram consumer technology into commercial vehicles, they're really working on building these electric vehicles from the ground up to be positioned for the delivery space, for really solving those challenges that you see as a contractor and understanding what the real world looks like. So we're going to get into all of that today. But for right now, John, welcome to the studio. Thank you for being here, at least virtually. I see you're in a little bit of a different location than I am.
Good to be here, Josh. Yeah, I am sitting in Harbinger's commercial vehicle factory. Behind me, you could see our battery module production line, where we're making about 1 megawatt hour a day of battery packs today.
Okay, and out in California, right?
That's right. We're in Orange County, California.
Perfect. Well, we'll get a little bit of that background as we're going. And John, if you just want to start, I gave a little bit of a background on Harbinger, but if you want to tell a little bit about who they are and what you do there.
So Harbinger is a company dedicated to building the right product at the right price. When we looked at this segment 5 years ago now, we thought, why would we electrify anything else before we've electrified medium duty? This is the place where it makes the most sense, where there's the best fuel savings, there's the biggest improvements to be had in vehicles, but none of that matters unless we electrify vehicles at a price customers can afford. This segment for a long time has been, I think, really hamstrung by manufacturers who came before us offering EVs at double or triple or quadruple the price of diesel trucks. And there's a spreadsheet argument around, don't worry about it, you're going to save money in 10 years. We just think that's nonsense. At Harbinger, we're dedicated to building electric vehicles that you can buy for the same price as diesel trucks from day one.
Okay. That's a pretty strong tagline. Hey, one of the things you said right there, though, medium duty, if somebody's never heard that phrase, what are you talking about specifically there?
So medium duty are vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating range from 10 to 26,000 pounds. Mm-hmm. These are vehicles that are bigger than pickup trucks and Sprinter vans. They're smaller than long haul trucks. At Harbinger, we specifically build in class 4 through 6. So we've narrowed that a little bit farther. These are vehicles with a GVWR range of 16 to 26,000 pounds. To us, that's an interesting sweet spot where the vehicles need to have the durability of a long haul truck. We're building vehicles here with a 20-year life expectancy. They've got to be a lot cheaper than those long haul trucks. So you've got something that's a lot more durable than a Sprinter type vehicle, but it's also still small enough that you can use it with a non-CDL driver. It's an unusual niche, and I think that's why it's so far behind the rest of the industry. You've really got to focus on this niche if you want to build the right product for it.
And I think that's what's really important, and we'll get into what that means. But I think there's a very different way of solving and addressing a niche market like that it does differentiate you guys a lot from what I've seen. But tell me a little bit more about that, because so I've seen a lot of different electric vehicle companies kind of enter the space and some of like what you talked about that are very expensive, but what makes Harbinger different from them outside of just targeting the medium duty space?
The big difference between Harbinger and everyone else in the segment is what's going on behind me. At Harbinger, we make everything in the vehicle. We buy commodities and we turn them into trucks. So behind me, they're taking cells, uh, battery cells from Panasonic, and they're turning them into modules and then into battery packs, all right here under Harbinger's control. Farther back behind that, behind the clear wall, you can see about 30 feet behind me, there's a chassis assembly line where we're bringing in all the raw components and assembling chassis. And then another layer behind that, there's a drivetrain line where we're actually taking raw copper and we're winding electric motors here on shore, and we're building transmissions, and then we're building complete drive units out of that. So everything's happening in the same place here, but it's all happening from those commodity layers. And so what we're buying here at Harbinger, they're very low priced inputs. We're transforming them into complete electric trucks. And we're doing so without giving away a ton of margin to big tier one suppliers. And that's allowed us to bring a product to market at a radically different price point than the companies that came before us.
Okay. And I'm sure this is part of that price point, but what is that different from others? Like, are most people making it in the US or are they making them elsewhere?
Harbinger is the only truck company in the world doing them. So there are two truck companies today doing the battery work that you can see behind. Harbinger and BYD. And Harbinger is the only company in trucking building complete drivetrains in-house. So this is a radically different approach. This is the approach that we learned from Tesla, and a lot of my team members have leadership roles there. So we've run this playbook before. But if you want to offer something at the right price, it doesn't start with buying a bunch of overpriced inputs from other companies. We want all the savings of electrification to go to the operators. If we double the price of the vehicle, the savings of electrification are essentially being like stolen by the supply chain and given to these tier ones who are selling components at really high prices. And that's just not what we're here to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sounds very different from a lot of what I've heard from others who are manufacturing in this industry as a whole. But what does that really mean from a cost perspective? Total cost of ownership. What can buyers expect that's different here?
So on the TCO front, that one's pretty low hanging fruit, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like an EV will always have lower TCO. It's just a question of how many years you're going to calculate that over. So you can go buy something like an MT50E, and there's a spreadsheet somewhere that will tell you that's going to have a lower TCO. It's going to take 20 years because the product is so expensive. But over a long enough time period, we can always make the TCO math work. The difference at Harbinger is that the TCO math, we just don't think that's good enough. We're focused on what is the price up front. So when you buy a Harbinger electric chassis, you can buy one for about the same cost as a diesel chassis. Not 5 years later, not with a bunch of incentives factored in, just line to line. We sell electric chassis at the same price point that our competitors sell diesel chassis.
Okay. Yeah, and that alone is pretty crazy because I agree with you. Basically any electric vehicle argument I've heard is if you own this long enough, it's you're gonna be better off. You're gonna make money, and that's the whole idea of electric. One, there's a whole renewable energy argument that makes sense depending on how you're thinking about the future of energy and consumables. But the idea is if you own one of these long enough, you're gonna be fine. But it's very different, I think, to be able to say, yes, that's true, but also the price on the front end is comparable to what you're paying for a diesel already. Now, and is that just you saying that's the price compared to a diesel with incentives, or is that like the true price
No,
compared?
that's with no incentives.
Okay. Yeah, because then it goes even
Once
farther.
you throw incentives in, it's a whole different ballgame. But we have customers in states where there are incentives available, but it's kind of a small list of states.
Mhm.
If you're in one of those states, it becomes sort of absurd, right? In states with incentives, we're underpricing used trucks. The trucks are, you know, they're not far off for being free. I don't love that, to be honest, because it's not very sustainable. We're benefiting from these incentives that they can't grow that large. So Harbinger was really about pricing the vehicle the right way in a zero incentive world.
Okay. Yeah, and that's really different, is what I would say there. A lot of people, when they think about the front end cost of electric, say that it only makes sense in a state where I get those tax incentives. And to hear that you've priced it without the incentives to make sense regardless, I think that really opens up, a world where suddenly, from a price point at least, it's available. But I think the next question always is, it's great that I can buy it. It's great that over time, this actually ends up being something that's cheaper on a spreadsheet, but does it actually work? Can I actually
Right.
use this in the territory that I have? So, if I have 100 mile or a 200 mile territory, can I
Mhm.
use one of these vehicles over the course of a day and it still works? So let's talk a little bit about range first. What are we seeing out of these vehicles? How many miles can they go?
So the Harbinger vehicles are built with a very modular battery system, so we can match the range to what the customer needs. My goal is really to sell the lowest priced vehicle that would meet the customer's needs. And
Mhm.
so I don't want to give them 20 or 30 or 100% more range than they need for their daily operation. So when we look at vehicles in this segment, what we see is that most of the trucks will consume between zero point 0.9 and 1.0 kilowatt hours per mile. So let's just choose 1.0 because the math all gets really easy that way. We offer three common battery options depending on the wheelbase. Four battery packs, that's 140 kilowatt hours. Five battery packs, that's 175 kilowatt hours. Or six battery packs, and that's 210 kilowatt hours. So that means those vehicles will do 140, 175, and 210 miles of real world range. Those battery sizes are usable energy. So another big difference in how we approach this. Uh, the battery packs are actually almost 10% bigger than that. So the battery pack capacity that we're quoting, that's the capacity that the operators actually get to use.
Mhm.
The additional reserve to make sure we don't hurt the battery. I think everyone understands that you don't really want to bring a battery down to zero at this point. We know that, and so when we say it's 140 kilowatt hour battery pack, it's really more like 150. But we don't think that the operator should be the one, paying the price for that extra range. So that those sets of real world ranges, 140, 175, 210, those are real world ranges that you should see every day.
Okay. So that's the range of what you can expect. It's a pretty high in terms of what I've seen from some others. Can it get any higher? Is there any other way to get above 210, or is that kind of the top end of, hey, if you've got mileage up in that 200 range or higher, this is probably not the right option for you?
So we've also just recently launched our series hybrid platform. In that one, we take the battery system and we add a range extender, which is
Mm,
a small gasoline motor. That I think is the right choice if you've got a really extreme delivery route. I think that's probably unusual for last mile for parcel.
mm,
I know that's the main audience that you guys serve at Route Consultant and help people optimize their routes. So if someone does have a 250-mile parcel route, um, number one, I'm sorry, that sounds like a heck of a job, but we
mhm.
can solve that problem if they want to move to a sustainable option. So with our hybrid, we can do 400 to 500 miles.
Okay. Yeah, that's huge because you're right. Not everybody's in that range, but there are some that get up there that have at least a truck or a route that gets up in that
Mhm.
range. And I think what I'm seeing and the world that we're headed towards is, we move towards a place where, you're partnered with FedEx or you're partnered with Amazon and they require you to have electric vehicles for, let's say, 80-90% of your fleet. And
Mhm.
is there an option? So it's good to hear that if you are having to move into that range, that you guys are already building options so that, if you have one of those territories and if you are required to move into a renewable energy type of option, that there is something here. Because yeah, I think it's not going to be too long. I think we're headed quickly towards the point where, you're going to have only a small percentage of your fleet even allowed to be gas, much less diesel. So I think that's where we're headed. So it is good to see the spectrum there. I think with that though is the question of, you know, is it something where I can get 100, 150 miles on a charge, or do I have to start and stop in the middle of the day to charge? Do I have to charge overnight? So what are those options? What does that look like for your fleet?
So we really don't expect anyone to charge during the day.
Okay.
Anything that's going to disrupt your operation, that's going to change the way that you want to do business, other than, of course, saving money. That's really not what we're looking for. So, if we look at a typical route, and most of our parcel customers are doing 60, 70 miles a day,
Mhm.
with ground type routes. We have seen routes up in the 120 range. A big part of it is just what kind of margin do you want in your range? If your goal is I want to do my whole route and I want to have another 20 or 30 miles, just in case there's a road closure, we've got some extra packages. That kind of gives you one answer. I think for that answer, our smaller vehicle is fine. If you're doing a 100-mile route, you got a 140-mile range, you've got plenty.
Mhm.
Now, I also think there's an interesting case to be made for the people with the shorter routes to say, I'd actually like to not charge not only during the day, but I don't want to charge at night. I want to charge every other day. So if you've got a 60, 70, even 80-mile route, I think our 175-mile vehicle is interesting because now we can go out, do the 70-mile route, come back. Maybe we don't have a charger tonight. Maybe the driver gets to plug it in. We can do a whole nother route, come back in, and we've still got 20 or 30 miles of extra range. So as we're thinking about vehicles and range, how you want to allocate chargers is a big piece of that. And I think that's something that people have been overlooking. But if you've got a dedicated charger and it's a one-to-one allocation, we can really cover 90-95% of parcel use cases without even touching the hybrid.
Okay. And I guess tell me a little bit more about the chargers. Is this something you charge it, at a station? Do you have to go to a specific place to be able to charge? What are those actually looking like today?
So we're fully standards compliant on the charging side. We work with two really common types of chargers. So J1772, and those are your pretty ubiquitous L2 AC chargers.
Hmm.
We offer two options for the onboard chargers for that, 12 kilowatts and 20 kilowatts. Uh, you're going to find these chargers installed in a lot of depots today within
Hmm.
the parcel industry. You're also going to find them at parking garages, at grocery stores. These are the chargers that you kind of find everywhere. They're slow chargers, and you can charge with that 20 kilowatts an hour. But remember, we said it's 1 kilowatt hour or 1 kilowatt hour per mile. So that means we're basically charging at a rate of 20 miles per hour.
Hmm.
So, if we come back, we plug into a 19.2 kilowatt charger at 6 p.m. If we did 100 miles that day, it's only going to take 5 hours to completely recharge that vehicle. And most vehicles in last mile are sitting overnight for 10 to 12 hours. And
Hmm.
that means we can get away with even smaller chargers. We can get away with 10 kilowatt, 12 kilowatt chargers and still be 100% topped off overnight. Now, we also support fast chargers, and we support fast charging at a 1 hour fast charge. So that means if you've got access to a fast charger, and more we're seeing these really big fast chargers available publicly through the bigger charging networks, especially Electrify America has a lot of 350 kilowatt fast chargers now. So with these bigger chargers, you plug in the vehicle and you're going to be charged from 10% to 90% in 1 hour.
Okay. And
I think
so,
that's more of a like, oops, I forgot to plug it in
yeah,
scenario.
yeah.
It tends to be a little more expensive if you're using those fast chargers. But if, show up in the morning, truck wasn't plugged in, I think it makes it pretty practical to sort of go out on a route and then maybe stop when you're going to have lunch, charge for half an hour, and get the vehicle basically topped off. But it provides a nice kind of recovery option.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And especially seeing those appear more and more, it means that you're not as worried about if I forgot or if it didn't properly charge overnight, I've got some of those options to get a quick charge in the middle of the day or at the beginning of the day even.
Exactly.
Um, are you finding anyone has challenges, if they have 10, 15 vehicles to get them all charged at a depot, or is that something where you have enough chargers, you build it in and you just kind of structure it based on the size vehicles you have and the location you have? I'm more worried about like one of the things I hear often is a concern about grid and the energy at a certain building if they can handle multiple vehicles.
I So far we haven't really seen that being an issue. I think, where that starts to get complicated is if you've got like 100 EVs in one place or
Yeah.
200 EVs in one place. Uh, with most buildings, you can support kind of 20, 30, 40, 50 vehicles.
Okay.
If if we're looking at, 200, it's very doable. It just requires a little bit more planning on that building side.
Yep.
One of the best ways to address that though is with charging management software or CMS. We're
Mm,
seeing more and more operators deploying software to manage all the chargers. And that allows you to charge more vehicles with the same amount of energy because you're not allowing all the chargers to run at full speed. That's something that we do here at Harbinger for our employee charging. We've
mm,
got, I think about 25 chargers now, all on one electrical panel. So it's
mm.
triple the amount of power that that panel will theoretically support. But we use charging management software from FlipTurn. So as the employees plug in more cars, the software is looking at what are all the cars that are plugging in, and it's just balancing all that charging out. So there's still only so much energy we can get through that system.
Yeah.
But if you've got 20 kilowatt chargers and you've got a 10-hour window, that's 20 kilowatts times 20 chargers. That's 400 kilowatt hours times 10 hours. So that's 4,000 kilowatt hours of energy. That's the amount of energy we could pull through that bank of chargers overnight.
Hmm.
We know that at 1 kilowatt hour per mile, that's 4,000 miles of driving. And that's what we can do every night. So that, to me, that sounds more like 100 trucks, 150 trucks,
Yeah.
even though there's only 20 chargers right there. So we can use charging software like that to put in more chargers without having to pay serious infrastructure costs because we're helping balance that across larger numbers of vehicles.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's anytime we're talking infrastructure, it's like, okay, this is gonna be take forever and be expensive, but the software side of things of actually balancing it in real time makes a lot of sense. So, we don't have to go into all of that right now, but I think that's from a peace of mind perspective about scale, I think that does a lot about making, it's like obviously as you approach 50 and 60 trucks at a building, you can start to think about infrastructure, but knowing
Exactly.
there's something in place that can balance it out for a much longer time, it gives you the bandwidth to say, okay, hey, we're headed towards that breaking point, but we got some time. Okay, that's much better. So that's good to hear.
There's some breaking point, but I think it's important
Yeah.
that people understand that it's not necessarily 50 trucks. It can be 2 or 3 or 400 trucks. And
Yeah.
if you've got 400 EVs, the amount of money you are saving every month at that point is staggeringly large. So that's a great problem to have.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, so one of the things too that we always hear on the electric side is that they can't perform in cold weather. So talk to me a little bit about that. Why do we hear that? But also, is that the case for you guys' vehicles as well?
And so you hear that for a good reason. Vehicles that have been built before Harbinger in this segment have performed terribly in cold weather.
Mm,
It wasn't unusual with early electric trucks to see 30, 40% loss of range.
mm,
And the reason for that is that in the cold weather, you're taking a lot of that battery energy and you're basically running a space heater with it,
mm.
which
Yeah.
just sucks up a ton of power. And that's, every kilowatt hour you put into that space heater, that's 1 mile less the truck's going to go.
Mm,
At Harbinger, we knew that wasn't an acceptable situation. So we approached the entire thermal system on the vehicle differently. So when you're driving a Harbinger truck and you kick on the heater, what the vehicle is doing is it's actually taking the waste heat being generated by the electric motor and it's pumping it into the cabin to heat the cabin for you.
okay.
And that should sound familiar because that's how all of your combustion vehicles work, right? The
Yeah.
heat is free. So it seems obvious, but to do that, we had to build a whole new thermal architecture using a multi-zone heat pump. So
Mhm.
same thermal system that a lot of people are moving to in their houses because it drives a lot of cost savings. With our heat pump, we're running cooling system through that electric motor, and we're just taking all that waste heat and now we're running it into the cabin. So, I won't say that heat is completely free,
Yeah.
but we're getting about 3 times more heat for each unit of energy than people without heat pump systems. So
Mm.
what we've seen when we've got vehicles on the road in New York and New Jersey in the winter, and we had vehicles through the winter last year uh, in the snow, we're seeing a range impact of maybe 10%.
Okay.
So it's not zero, but it's more than possible to absorb that. Um, with that size impact, we see a pretty symmetric impact, whether you're in extreme hot or extreme cold.
Mhm.
If you are running the AC all day, it may be another 10%. So it is sort of a 10% buffer on both sides of the plan.
Yeah. And that makes sense. Like you said, that's a reasonable hit. It's not a detrimental, business destroying amount of range detriment.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
so, we're talking about all these systems. What does the maintenance look like to actually repair one of these? I'd imagine, the average mechanic can't just repair this if you just take it into the shop. Is that the case? Or what can you expect out of the actual repairs side of these vehicles?
So that's another thing where we didn't want to sign our customers up for unnecessary pain points. So
Hmm.
Harbinger vehicles are very serviceable by any skilled technicians that you would take a diesel truck to. So if we look at most of the systems on the vehicle, thermal system, AC, brakes, steering and suspension, axles, you're going to be able to service all of these with your regular mechanics. If we look at the few pieces that have actually changed, if we look at the battery, if we look at the electric drive unit, what we've done is made those systems extremely easy to swap in and out so that your same mechanic can pull the system and swap in a new one. So let's
Okay.
say you've got an issue with the battery system. Let's say you hit a cinder block on the road, right? And I'm sure your listeners in New Jersey and Philadelphia know that happens a lot
Yeah.
more often than it should. And I say that as someone who lived in Philly for about 5 years and had dodged a lot of cinder blocks.
Uh-huh.
Um, the idea here is your mechanic can pull the battery pack out, swap it with a replacement, and get you back on the road immediately without having to get a specialty mechanic that's trained, open that battery system up to deal with the high voltage risks. So our
Hmm.
battery systems can technically be swapped in about 10 minutes.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, sometimes faster than my batteries if I'm doing it myself. So that's
And
crazy.
same thing on the drive. We can replace the entire drivetrain system on one of our vehicles in about 1 hour.
Wow. Okay, so that's, that would be one of my biggest concerns if I'm, driving one of these is that, hey, it's great that I bought it and it's nice on the front end, but that, as soon as something breaks, no one can fix it until I take it, back to you guys directly. So hearing that that's not going to be a huge issue. And if anything, it's simpler than a lot of others. And the things that we talk about always with electric, there's none of the fluids that you often have to deal with. So there's already a lot of the repairs that you're typically dealing with a gas or a diesel vehicle that are out of the equation. But to hear that the things that I would expect to be more complicated and more expensive are pretty simple and quick is also, pretty comforting to know that that's an option.
Absolutely. We want our customers to be able to take their vehicles to the mechanics they already know and like,
Yeah.
and have comfort that those mechanics can change the brake system, can do a safety inspection for them, that they don't need some exotic skill set.
Okay. Okay, so talk to me a little bit more now about, what it's like actually on the driver end. Are these comfortable vehicles to drive or, how do they compare to the typical vehicle experience for a driver?
So this is an area where I think the benefits have really been undersold because people are really focused naturally with EVs on the fuel savings.
Okay.
But when we look at medium duty trucks specifically, the opportunity to improve the driver experience is just massive because the vehicles that our customers have today, overwhelmingly they were designed in the 70s and the 80s. So there's just a lot of room for improvement. When we look at the Harbinger trucks, the 3 areas where we've, I think, made a really big difference. We've moved to a much more comfortable suspension system. So in the front end, instead of using the typical leaf spring and solid steer axle front end, we've moved to an independent double wishbone suspension. Same thing that you would find on a really high-end sedan or a Formula One car today. So these are vehicles that ride and maneuver really precisely. When you hit a pothole, doesn't feel like the whole truck is being dragged into it.
Yeah.
We've moved to a much faster and higher assist steering system. So we use what's called EPAS steering, electronic power assisted steering. And that means we've eliminated that hydraulic system in the steering. So there's another maintenance item that's gone. But it also means that we've got much lower steering input. So, it's not, if you've driven some of the older trucks in this segment, especially the bigger diesels, it can be a workout to drive those trucks for 8-10 hours a day.
Yeah.
When you drive a Harbinger truck, it's like driving an F-150 or an Explorer.
Okay.
It's easy to drive, easy to steer. And then we've taken that same opportunity to make the vehicle turn in a much smaller space. And when we think about performance, we think about what's getting our drivers through their route as fast as possible. And that's not actually going faster. It's being able to do a U-turn on a residential street. It's being able to avoid putting the vehicle into reverse and all the accidents that come in reverse. So when you turn a Harbinger vehicle, our turning circle is dramatically smaller than anything else in the segment, but it's also dramatically smaller than the turning circle you get in a Sprinter van, in a Transit, in a bright drop vehicle. So we can do a full U-turn in about 40 feet, which means most residential roads, if you miss a stop, hang U-turn, come back. We don't have to go around the block and sort of deal with all this time loss. That's the sort of thing that we think, it's not really electrification, right? The vehicle doesn't turn sharper because it's electric. The vehicle turns in a smaller circle because we cared about the driver experience and designed it that way.
Yeah, that's, you mentioned it, but that is so important for actually getting a route to be more efficient. It does happen. You miss a stop, but beyond just saving time, you're eliminating the need to potentially have to back up, and that's where most accidents occur in this, last mile space. So being able to just turn around like a normal vehicle as opposed to, having to make a 16-point turn to get back to.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's crazy in terms of what it saves in time and safety for that operation.
One of our customers just told us last week that they've seen 60% of their accidents happen in reverse, even though the vehicle's in reverse for less than 1% of the miles.
Yep. It's just the way it goes. And you're doing everything you can, everything you teach, every safety thing you put in the vehicles to try to prevent it, but that's just where the accidents happen. So whatever you can do to eliminate it, it goes a long way.
And when we're in reverse, we still want to make safety better there as well. So we offer a full bird's eye view camera system on the vehicles. And of course, every vehicle comes with a backup camera, which also has our dynamic trajectory showing, where the vehicle's going to be as you move the steering wheel. So just being able to see what's going on around the truck at all times, it can make such a difference.
Yeah, it's huge. So you touched on a couple of examples there, but are there any other just kind of larger examples of what a fleet or a customer has seen as they've made a transition to Harbinger?
I think one of the most exciting data points that we've seen is the real world fuel savings. We obviously people focus a lot on that for EVs, but there's a lot of arm waving, a lot of like, well, what am I really going to save? There's a lot of questionable data points that people are throwing out there around maintenance as well. You're going to save 90% on maintenance. Like, I don't really think that's accurate, but on the fuel savings, what we saw in a pilot we ran this summer was a 72% fuel savings.
That is a meaningful amount of savings for what is often one of the top, 2 or 3 expenses for one of these businesses. So that is significant to say the least, especially when you're not having to pay the price of 5 vehicles on the front end just to get one. If you're paying like a true comparable rate to get that vehicle in the first place, and then you're saving 72% on fuel, that's pretty remarkable to say the least, I'd say.
And we think that at the bottom line, that looks like $8,000 to $12,000 a year in savings. It
Mm,
depends on what state you're in, but even if you're in a state with really high electric prices and low gas or diesel prices, we're still talking $8,000 to $9,000 a year, which
yeah.
is it's I think going to have a huge impact on our customers to have that much more margin.
So talk to me a little bit more about, what's the future for Harbinger? What are the things that we can expect from you guys over the next few years?
Over the next few years, one of the things that you'll see is a lot more modern safety features. We're starting to roll in, I think, more and more exciting features to bring drivers the sort of modern safety that they should be expecting in these vehicles. So I'll have some more detailed announcements on that early next year.
Hmm.
But one of the things that we built into the truck is an over-the-air update system. And so that means that we can keep giving our customers more features year over year after they've taken delivery.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, instead of having to buy a new truck every 2 years, you just wait for the new feature download and get out on the road.
Yeah, we're going to see that in predictive maintenance, in telematics. There's a lot of stuff that we've built here initially for companies' use for our test vehicles. And as we see those things mature, we're bringing those now out to our customers. And it allows us to, I think, be a lot more customer responsive by having that ability to develop new functionality and share functionality that we developed for our own use with our customers, even months or years after they bought the vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. Because obviously with technology like this, there's going to be new developments. You guys are all constantly going to be looking for the next thing. And so being able to share that with your customers as you find it just gives you the feeling of comfort and support that I'm not just buying a vehicle, but I'm partnering with a company that's trying to kind of pave the way forward in this space.
Absolutely.
Okay, John. So that was great. That's kind of really what I wanted to hit and dive into when it comes to this industry and the things to understand. But I do have one more question that I ask for everybody who comes on this podcast. So, if you have a favorite book or movie that you have read or watched recently, what would it be? You can answer both, but you got to answer at least one.
I just finished watching the latest season of Diplomat
Okay.
on Netflix, which
I haven't even
I'd
heard of that.
highly
What's that?
recommend. Uh, that'll take more than the last few seconds to explain. So you'll just have to go watch it to find out.
Okay. Perfect. Well, John, I really appreciate you being on here and really cutting through the noise for what I think a lot of people experience and have questions on when it comes to EVs. Appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in Harbinger at the expo, where hopefully everybody will get a chance to see you guys in person, see those vehicles, and get a taste of what you guys have put together here. So again, thank you for being here and for answering all of our questions.
No problem. Great to be here, Josh.
All right. See you guys.